Today, it's great to have Michael Murphy on the podcast. Michael is co-founder of Esalen Institute, a pioneer of the human potential movement, and author of many influential books on extraordinary human potential. Michael, it's so great to chat with you today.
Good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. What a legend you are. How are you doing with COVID and this pandemic? How's it personally affected you?
Well, I've been physically healthy. I've been very lucky with my health. I'm 90 now, but just knock on wood, I've never had a major illness, and I got the first vaccination, and I'm going to get the second one Friday.
Oh, wonderful! That's good.
So
that's good
that's
news.
on the physical front. Esalen, has taken a lot of blows with both the pandemic and with the weather and the highway down into the Big Sur. But we are got a wonderful staff, and we're gearing up to open again next month, and a lot of plans for the future.
Oh, that's great news. That's great news. Well, I wanted to start with, if that's okay with you, I wanted to kind of start with some of your earliest childhood memories, because I want to kind of go in chronological order as I go through your life a little bit today. And I'm particularly interested in, what it was like being raised with a family of doctors, I believe, in an Irish Catholic household, in a rural farming community in Salinas, California, I believe. When you were a child, did you grow up with a lot of... Yeah, go on. You just tell me. You just talk.
Well, no, Salinas, California.
Salinas, got you. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. My grandfather was indeed a doctor. My father was a lawyer. It was a farming community. It's my grandfather delivered John Steinbeck, and so if you read any of Steinbeck's books, The Grapes of Wrath or East of Eden,
Sure.
You get a setting of our hometown. So that's where I started. And anyway.
Did you, I'm wondering what you were like as a kid. I was wondering, did you have a lot of like wonder and awe as a child? Like, were you, I know that it didn't take until, you're in college till you had some of these more spiritual experiences, but did you have any spiritual experiences in like your youth? I've never asked you that. I'm curious.
Well, I was, my father's side of the family, put a huge premium on writing. So we were read to a lot growing up. And also a big premium on skepticism. I mean, the people my father talked about, H.L. Mencken, Will Rogers and Mark Twain and Jonathan Swift and et cetera. On my father's side, it was not a family of churchgoers, but I was a religious kid, was an altar boy in the Episcopal Church. I was the only one really on my father's side of the family who went to church regularly. And so, yes. And when I was in my early teens, I began forming a basic metaphysical framework, really. And it was influenced by my love of things in the church, I must confess. And I was in the Episcopal Church, which one could think of, as Catholicism light. As you get the cathedrals and you get the choirs and Holy Communion, but a lot of the ministers don't take it all that seriously. I mean, they hold their dogmas lightly, it was, so I didn't, it's funny, I have no memory of praying to Jesus, none. It was, so it was a kind of I was in effect a kind of a Unitarian, going to church, and but there's no doubt about it. I was religious in a non-dogmatic way, and that was the way it was. And then when I got to Stanford University and walked by mistake, you and I have talked about this, into the lecture by the great teacher of comparative religions, Frederick Spiegelberg.
Yeah.
And by mistake. And that really changed my life. I was a sophomore at Stanford, and when I heard that Atman was Brahman, I mean, it changed my life. It really did. So I was subconsciously, basically, intuitively set up to not only to believe, but to practice what came with this introduction. It was a course on comparative religions. And the first lecture was on the Vedic hymns and the Upanishads. So hearing all that bowled me over and started me on my quest that eventually led me to, quit my fraternity and quit pre-med. My family was I was designated, my role designation within the family was to be a doctor.
Yeah.
And my brother was supposed to be a writer. He was a writer. But anyway, I gave that up, and then,
you became a writer.
It was a big shock, huge shock to my family. It was a huge shock to my family. I mean, this turn. And so that's how I got started, and particularly influenced by the work of Sri Aurobindo, the Indian philosopher and great political leader, and spent a year and a half in his ashram in India in my, I was 25 and 26, and came home and started Esalen and so forth.
And so forth. Right. That's an understatement. Well, so I want to understand. So in 1962, you met Price, right? And in what context did you meet Dick Price in 1962?
Well, we met actually in 1960.
Oh, okay.
I was 29 years old. He and Dick had a profound mystical set of experiences for which he was institutionalized. And he had really suffered at the hands of the psychiatric reductionism that, later Abe Maslow and Carl Rogers and Rollo May and others were in revolt against. And he, it had been a very tough, deeply bruising, wounding set of insulin shock treatments in one of the most prestigious psychiatric hospitals in the country, the Institute for the Living. And, there's been stuff written about this. And but in any case, he looked me up. We had been classmates at Stanford, but had never met. And so he had, he knew that I had been my departure into the outlaw country.
Yep.
As an undergraduate when I was 20. So this was 10 years later when we met, and we were now both turning 30 and finding our way forward. And one thing led to another, and we ended up in Big Sur. I had had a dream to start a center such as Esalen. A dream without a blueprint, but with a number of basic ideas and principles to base it upon that he and I shared, starting with the idea that no one would capture the flag. It would be a place for exploration and not a traditional or dogmatic teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And it would involve a vision of what my teacher Aurobindo would call the integral, body, mind, heart, and soul. It was that, we are psychophysical creatures. We are embodied, latently spiritual creatures. And we are part of the cosmic adventure, which is evolutionary, and which in today's kind of parlance, words that people can understand, a kind of panentheism, the doctrine that the divine is both transcendent and immanent, and that the evolution is the unfoldment of our latent divinity. I mean, that would be the basic metaphysics with which we started the place. But along with that, a lot of feelings about, for example, psychoanalysis and scientific reductionism. Both of us were steeped in the literature of authoritarianism. You know, the authors of those days, whether it was Erich Fromm or that whole cast of characters that in the 50s emerged, the True Believer, Erich Hoffer, and so forth, that culture, which shapes us every day of our life in ways that are hard to track because they're so ubiquitous, need to be understood, not just for health, but for a greater life that's pressing always to be born in us, always pressing. And both of us had been influenced in different ways by the Jungian ideas that many neuroses were the budding potentials in us, and that we had to have a new framework to understand these behaviors and urges and so forth that were deemed by mainstream culture and by psychoanalysis to be pathological. So anyway, here we were, 30 years old, starting this place on this beautiful property in Big Sur that my family owned, 2 miles long of priceless Big Sur property that my grandfather had purchased in 1910 to build a spa in the European style. He and my grandmother, they had gone to Baden-Baden and Wiesbaden, in Germany, and, in the tradition of those days, to look at those spas. So anyway, but in any case, here was his property, a kind of enough buildings to house people, and we started inviting everyone who'd influenced us, and everybody came.
I saw the list. Yeah. I saw the guest list. I saw.
Yeah. And so anyway, we raised a flag, and an army rallied. Mm. And as we shaped our program up, before we had done anything yet, one night, Abe Maslow drove in with his wife, Bertha, looking for a room, and discovered this place at the end of nowhere on this lonely, dark highway. And I had purchased a dozen copies of Toward a Psychology of Being a few weeks prior. So the staff was reading it. So he walks into this spooky place in the middle of the night at the end of nowhere, and here everybody reading Toward a Psychology of Being. And I took it as an omen that we were on the right track. And in those early days, I kept a journal of coincidences because it seemed like our guardian angels or whatever was on our side. And Abe and I, I actually was not there the night he drove in. So but we started corresponding and we became quite close. And he told his daughters eventually that I was the son he never had. I mean, we got that close. But then came quite a train of thinkers, psychiatrists, artists, and all. And we had a new culture being born. I mean, we were hardly aware of it. I mean, in the 60s, in the way it's used as a cliche for an era, really didn't start till about 1964. I would date it with, the free speech movement in Berkeley in 1964. But in any case, here we were in 61 and 62. So we hit a wave before the wave had hit the shore, so to speak. So we were carried in on this wave of interest. And so this thing developed, and we grew it. It kind of grew organically. One person led to another, one idea to another, and so it was we were very Taoistic about it. And Abe was there with us all the way. I mean, he was a tremendous starter from the start. So anyway, that's a kind of headlines of how we got started.
Thank you.
I'd like to take a moment to talk about one of our sponsors, Skillshare. No matter what 2021 has in store for all of us, one way you can stay creative and curious is by taking online classes with Skillshare. There's no better way to find new, exciting ways to fill our free time or to revisit old hobbies. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of fascinating classes for creative and curious people like listeners of the Psychology Podcast. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. The platform allows you to introduce yourself to a community of millions, and the lessons can help you stay inspired during these uninspiring times. There are a variety of topics you can choose from. My creative listeners may be interested in video, music production, photography, music, film, and even web development. Personally, I've been enjoying classes in the creative writing category. For instance, Susan Orlean's course called Creative Nonfiction, Write Truth with Style, is fantastic and helped me a lot with how to properly organize my notes. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers membership with meaning. With so much to explore, real projects to create, and the support of fellow creatives, Skillshare empowers you to accomplish real growth. Bring color and beauty and fun to your year. Add vivid details and craft complex wonders. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month, but today we have a special offer just for listeners of the Psychology Podcast. Explore your creativity at Skillshare.com/psych and get a free trial of premium membership. Again, explore your creativity at Skillshare.com/psych and get a free trial of premium membership. That's Skillshare.com/psych. Okay, now back to the show.
Can we talk about some of the original guest list people? You had Aldous Huxley, you had B.F. Skinner, you had Rollo May. Can you just tell me some of these people that you met? Can you just go down the list? Go. Tell me the list.
Okay. Aldous Huxley, gave us some language, really. Because my thought then was, so saturated with the thinking of Sri Aurobindo and the Upanishads and the Vedas. I mean, very influenced by all of that. Yes. And on the other hand, by German idealism, by Fichte and Schelling and Hegel. I mean, so for us to start telling the world that we were going to explore the dialectic progress of the Geist and the Gestalten der Bewusstsein of Hegel. Wouldn't have worked as well, but Huxley's essays then on human potentialities. So we use this kind of language to give ourselves an open blank check that could handle the complexities that were necessarily contained in this seed, this acorn. There was an oak tree in there, but we needed a kind of open language. So Aldous Huxley, and then with Aldous Huxley came Gerald Hurd, his famous friend, who, they'd come over together from England in the 30s and 40s and embraced the Vedanta, in Los Angeles. So I would say that was a stream. All right. Then on the psychology side, through a Maslow came Jim Bugenthal. Yes. If you've read his books,
oh yeah,
you could say very Maslowian. Carl Rogers, Rollo May, the whole crowd. And now remember, 61 was when Maslow, with Tony Sudich, started both the Journal of Humanistic Psychology and the Association. So they were starting the same time we were. So that group, which contained all sorts of folks, we don't think of a lot. The UCLA had a group, Jim Clark, Tannenbaum, and Zelinsky, and a number of them who were at UCLA. And I could go on and name them, some 24 psychologists, a lot of them in Southern California, but across the country. And then, for various reasons, a huge stream out of Wilhelm Reich. Maslow used to tell people who would ask him, where's the best place to go to learn about Wilhelm Reich? He would always say Esalen, because you had Alexander Lowen and bioenergetics and the different wings of the Reichian and Neo-Reichian stream, which flowed into what we call somatics now, that there's no such thing as anything that's purely psychological. Everything is psychophysical. And this was in Wilhelm Reich's, you'd have to call it like a revolt against Freud, his master, saying that you have to deal not only with character armor, but the somatic armor, Wilhelm Reich.
Yep.
And so the emphasis on the psychophysical. Now that cohered with the teaching of the philosopher who influenced me, Sri Aurobindo, who you couldn't call really an idealist. I would call him an evolutionary panentheist. And he felt that the human body is implicated in everything we do or say right now. I mean, the way I gesture, the way we're sitting here looking at through this machine. I mean, this is having influences on us we're hardly aware of. So we are physical creatures. So anyway, the whole Reichian world came strongly into Esalen. And then from the beginning, Gregory Bateson, if you know his work, Gregory is always an influence on us, and he was profoundly influential in those days on many fronts. Married to Margaret Mead, he was a kind of a Renaissance man, English. His father was William Bateson, who was the key person in the Darwinian synthesis of the turn of the century, and his name Gregory was named after Gregor Mendel, and his father, William Bateson, put Darwin together with Gregor Mendel, because Darwin talked about, those of us who are interested in evolutionary theory. I mean, it's a fact that it isn't just natural selection. I mean, how do you get variation? How do you get, and there are mutations? And anyway, Gregor Mendel was with his sweet peas. He was a monkey, had come up with his theory of all this. So anyway, Gregory was there, and he was an influence, no doubt about it. And then Fritz Perls, you know Fritz Perls' work.
Yeah.
Fritz had a clinical genius. He wasn't a nice guy.
I heard he was a bit eccentric. Yeah.
Well, that's a kind of understatement. You know, he had a streak, I would call it, of clinical genius. I mean, he could look at you and see things and point them out, whether you wanted to know or not.
Yeah.
And in the spirit of that age, the explosive spirit of it, and Esalen had this carte blanche to explore things. And he felt that he moved in, and we built a house for him, and he lived there for 5 years, and he was a tremendous influence, and he became famous for Gestalt therapy, which spread around the world, and he had come up with it and with others back in the 40s. So that stream flowed in. Then, of course, you had the Eastern thought, Alan Watts, who I and Dick had known before we started Esalen. So he came, Arnold Toynbee, you know, the famous historian, probably the world's most famous historian then. And he told us about what he considered possibly the greatest cultural event of the 20th century, lectured, which would be the coming of Eastern thought to the West. So in other words, I could go on and on with this, but there were connections among all these people. But we, because we were not beholden to any university or any church or any government entity or anything, we were free. My family owned the land. Dick and I didn't pay ourselves. We didn't get a salary for the first 5 or 6 years, but
Wow.
we managed. Better to say we mismanaged our way forward. We were doing enough things right. The idea was right enough that we stayed afloat, and then the program evolved. And that would be another story, Scott, on how we developed structurally. I don't know if we have time for that today, but we learned, well, we started as a business, became a nonprofit, a 501c3, and then we evolved and started all sorts of things. And by the late 60s, were widely imitated. And what we brought that was novel was a continued, sustained focus on a variety of worldviews and practices that were usually kept apart. But by bringing them into a single purview in this place, these centers started to spring up, and pretty soon YMCAs and university extensions and liberal churches. We had a working arrangement for a while with the National Council of Churches. Theologians were coming down there, and then, so it was an explosion that occurred in the 60s of opening up to perspectives that were new to the United States and new to many, and to Europe. And we were imitated by showing that you could hold them in a single purview, and that our doctrine was no one captures the flag. Because you give me a set of gurus, and half of them are going to want to take charge. And I do think that in every population, there's so many people designed to be top sergeants, and they will line up and start a discipline. I don't care where the stream starts from, the stream of influence, but nevertheless, an open-ended exploration into this larger human nature that's pressing to be born in us. I mean, that's how we talked about and still talk about what we're doing. Humankind is waking up to this greater destiny, but it has to fly into some pretty fierce headwinds, as you know, and as you talk about in your work.
Oh, for sure. I want to talk about that. I want to pick up on that theme. I just have a quick question about, did Eric Fromm ever visit? Did you ever meet him?
No, that's a good question. I had read him, but no, we never crossed paths.
Bummer.
We never did. And yeah, it's a bummer because he had influenced me quite a bit in the 50s.
Yeah.
And he, as Abe Maslow and Rollo May and Carl Rogers and all these came into prominence, he faded away and then passed away, and so he had preceded that. And there'd been a number, Adorno and the whole Frankfurt School, the anti-authoritarianism, which had been ignited in response to Nazism, and this astonishing, unbelievable horror that took over Europe with the Nazis. So that gave a tremendous energy to that generation of thinkers that just preceded the humanistic psychology crowd. So no, none of them, most of them had died by the time we started.
Hey everyone, do you listen to this podcast and wish you could ask me some questions? Well, now's your chance. Every Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, I go live on the Stereo app with my friend AJ Jacobs, a best-selling author and lifestyle experimenter. AJ and I will answer all psychology-related questions. We've been doing this for over a month now and have been so impressed with the quality of the questions from the listeners. Note that our weekly conversations are only on the Stereo app. With Stereo, you can be your very own talk host, or if listening is more your thing, you can jump on our weekly Stereo talk and ask all those questions you're curious about relating to the mind, brain, and human behavior. All you've got to do is download the Stereo app and follow me at stereo.com/psychpodcast. Then just join us on Sundays at 5 p.m. Pacific Time to join in on the discussion. Again, download the Stereo app and follow me at stereo.com/psychpodcast and join us on Sundays at 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Once you sign up, follow me so that you can get notified every time I go live on Stereo. See you there. What about Karen Horney? Did you ever meet her?
No, these are good questions. No, I never did. I had read her. Yeah, all through the 50s, I had read her.
Yeah, but they preceded.
And Eric Fromm. They preceded. And again, Abe and all his cohorts and Fritz Perls and all of them were younger, and they had grown up to some extent with those. Kurt Goldstein, who influenced Abe, had this term self-actualization. Abe got that from Kurt Goldstein. But see, they were the older psychologists.
Yeah. No, of course.
How did we get? Beg pardon?
No, go on. I just said of course.
No, I just said of course. That's it.
You just so go on.
Well, how did B.F. Skinner come? Well, that was through George Leonard, and George and I became soulmates. In 1965, he was the West Coast editor for Look magazine, and in those days, Look magazine and Life magazine were the most prominent, big. They were the village newspapers if you thought of America as a village, and he was very, very active in the civil rights movement, and we started a program pretty easy, black-white encounter groups as transcendence or transcendent experience. I mean, we could, and those were amazing.
I want to hear about those.
60s. Well, yeah, I mean, Price Cobbs was one of the principal with George, and Price was a black psychiatrist, psychoanalytically trained, and wrote a book called Black Rage, which takes, you would have to call it a neo-Freudian look at the whole black-white thing. And it's too bad people don't read him anymore, but so he was central in this, and so that was a big deal for us.
Well, I do think it's important to talk about this a little bit because, there's obviously a lot of racial tensions that still exist today in America. And I don't see black, white encounter groups as a thing anymore. Like, what happened to them? What happened to them?
Well, okay. For one thing, it morphed. I mean, it went on at its height. It was about a 4-year creative set of programs. Some of the black leaders, my friend Mike Brown, involved with sheriff's posses and, sheriffs and dealing with these issues. You could say, I mean, it's the same basic issues that we have with Black Lives Matter. It's, an immense amount of humor and laughter. If you can imagine, the very first groups in 1967, black and white folks, men and women together in those hot tubs. So you'd have, with no, in the nude. And here you couldn't even be in the same swimming pool in the South.
Wow,
blacks were kept out of white swimming pools. And of course, when you get a thing like that going, you can't imagine the humor and the fun we had. Everybody tends to, in those days, fall in love with each other and very uninhibited. But in some ways, a richer language because, let's face it. I mean, we were a upper middle class outfit, both whites and blacks. And we learned a lot about class issues in the black community, as well as, racial issues between blacks and whites. And Andy Young, into whose arms Martin Luther King fell when he was shot, started coming down to Esalen in those years with his wife, and he became friends. He was a wonderful friend for us because he said that we had a stealth revolution going, a sneaky revolution. And but anyway, George Leonard Price Cobbs, and then, so we got ourselves connected to what I would say the Southern Leadership Conference, not directly. John McGuire had been one of the freedom riders and was close to John Lewis, and the younger members of the SCLC. And that is the gold standard for moral political leadership, of what they represented. And of course, it really, it was lively as hell, but then it tapered off, and it did, some of the people involved did get involved in what was then eventually got swallowed up in a diversity training in corporations. And so then then we were having by then, the feminist revolution, the gay revolution. So diversity swallowed up the black-white emphasis. So pretty soon, as we have now, we have a diversity of diversity. And that has complicated the situation. And then you get into the sexual identity thing and et cetera. So we, like everybody, have had our problems with that. And you can have conflicts within revolutions. This revolution threatens this revolution. I mean, we could have a program on that, a discussion of that. And that complexity of liberating, consciousness-raising activities can become a Tower of Babel. And we've had to constantly exercise traffic control in the different impulses and the revolutionary impulses. Revolutionaries don't always get along. I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
In every revolutionary movement has a powerful centrifugal force and a tendency to fragment. So anyway, that's been in operation at Esalen too. But those were, it was a very rich period there with our black, white, and counter groups. And but it's has not been a central focus. And then, in Esalen, we've had many other things. We, as you probably know, we got very involved with what's become called now Track 2 diplomacy, citizen diplomacy with the Russians. And, during the Cold War years, we were very active in Russia. And, we were probably one of the only places on earth where KGB and CIA guys were together in those hot tubs, just like blacks and whites.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And, so again, we had a free place where you could explore these things. And we, ended up Esalen sponsoring Boris Yeltsin on his first trip over here and to the States when he flipped and saw that communism wasn't working, et cetera. So we, so what I want to say is that these different causes have taken hold at Esalen, and we've become a catalyst for a lot of stuff that's happened in them. So Esalen's been a hard place to pigeonhole and describe even. And for some people, just extremely difficult to understand.
But it's difficult for people to understand who haven't been there. I saw a documentary about Esalen. I don't know if you are aware that one part of a documentary was made, and it just the people who had visited Esalen just spoke with such depth of emotion. They said that some of them described seeing like orbs, meditating on the ocean and seeing these little. Did you ever see orbs?
No, I never saw the orbs. It's not unique just to Esalen there. That Big Sur coast, Scott, if you've been there, I mean, it's 100 miles long. And it's some of the steepest cliffs in the world that get up to that 3,000 feet, I mean, you can go down to Tierra del Fuego and a few places, but it's where the continent is like a sled as it moves west, and the rock it turns up vertical. What is horizontal becomes vertical. In other words, and it's so that highway along there, it pushes you into nature at its wildest. With these cliffs and these big waves and the winds. I mean, there are places in the world like this. You go up in the Scottish Highlands or maybe out to the west of Ireland. I mean, you can, no wonder people see the wee people. And people get into altered states on our property. There's no doubt about it. It has something about it that induces it, including this thing of seeing lights. And so a lore has developed there. But the combination of that geography with the intentions and the practices of Esalen produce a field effect, and people feel it who come down there. There's no doubt about it. So it's a fortunate place to be able to explore into the undiscovered country. It's
yeah. It's still part of popular culture. Did you watch the Mad Men finale by any chance? That's Esalen, right? That's Esalen.
Well, they wanted to film it at Esalen. So they built a place just down the highway. I actually did not know they were doing that, but our then CEO said you can't film here. Well, people have wanted to film on the property, but yeah, that was supposedly Esalen. Yeah.
Yeah, Don Draper's meditating. It's very funny. It's wonderful. Can you introduce my audience a little bit to integral transformative practice, or ITP? I think my audience would absolutely love to learn a little bit more about it.
Well, George Leonard and I started it. It was actually George's idea. And I'd been writing my most ambitious book, The Future of the Body. And he had, and I had been, thick as thieves since 1965, when he became president of Esalen, and was very active. And he was still the West Coast editor of Look magazine. And he, through our friendship and through the whole influence of the place, first he took up Aikido. He became a 5th degree black belt. He became one of the leaders in the American martial arts. Okay, and as I was writing this book, he came to think, let's try to start a program to anchor this a practice, body, mind, heart, and soul, long-term, for people who are householders. And so when the book was published, we started the project with an experimental group. We actually did what Abe Maslow used to call that we need always in these things, something he called it pre-scientific, to begin to study the results. Is it working? And we did that for 2 years and published a book called The Life We Are Given, which describes the experiment and gives the rationale and so forth. And that's resulted in thank you.
This is my copy. It's my copy.
My personal copy with lots of notes.
Great. Well, thanks for showing it. And it's still going. This was our first experiment was 92. So it's 29 years later. And people can go to, there's a website, and just ITP, International, Integral Transformative Practice. So it's a community of practice. There are groups, in different places, a few in Europe. And we're involved now with research studies. Pamela Kramer is the #1 spark plug. Christina Grote is the chairman of the board. It's a 501c3, and it supports, it's a nonprofit supporting long-term transformative practice, and the integral is body, mind, heart, and soul.
What's the soul? Of course,
was central to Esalen.
What's the soul?
What is that? How's that different from the heart?
Yeah. Okay. Those both words are quite fluid, and are used in countless ways. They refer to sets of experiences that overlap, but the shorthand way to say what heart would stand for in our, the practice of ITP, is it's everything that deals with emotion, roughly you could say, with the territory of psychoanalysis, Jungian analysis, psychosynthesis of Robert Assagioli. If you want to turn to the chakra systems, that it's the chakras up to, let's say, the higher chakras. Soul would refer to those territories of transcendence which defy the laws of physical universe as they're now construed. It's beyond Newton. It's beyond this reductionistic materialism into that place where ecstasy is possible, and where you need where the great mystics come into contact with today's secular psychologists. Jung kind of tiptoed into the edges of this territory. Abe Maslow was really entering into it when he died in his 60s. Soul. So we're using it, in the broadest sense there. It's beyond the purview of mainstream secular humanism. It's saying that secular humanism, which carries so many good things, has come to deny incredible territories of human experience. It just has in our universities. So, for example, you can talk about psychical research, parapsychology, telepathy, clairvoyance, and so forth.
But hypnosis?
Hypnosis can be viewed through a mainstream, secular, humanist, reductionist view.
Yeah.
If you study the history of mesmerism, if you go back to the early, back to the late 18th century with Mesmer himself, who was reductionist, he was a physicalist. He thought there was a fluid. He was, everybody, the god of all gods was Isaac Newton. I mean, this is the stupendous success of the Principia of Newton's. I mean, it was such a stupendous success. And it coming with the revolt of modernism against all the superstitions of the Middle Ages and religion generally. So that when these phenomena that were released by mesmerism were reduced, but then you had this breakout among certain strands of mesmerism and hypnosis. That word hypnosis is, in a way, I mean, that was, James Braid was an Englishman, and British empiricism put a lid on a lot of this. This is what, if you read William Blake, Newton's Sleep. Okay, so it was kind of captured by reductionistic, physicalistic paradigms, but meanwhile opened a lot of people up into these very far out experiences. So, we're covering a lot of ground fast here, but
we sure are.
Through. But you could say all of it led through what the Buddhists would call the middle worlds of subtle bodies and fantastic figures and psychic powers into the further reaches of ecstatic experience, where St. John of the Cross, Plotinus, the great Eastern and Western philosophers who talked about this greater human nature that is through which we learn who we really are. And one with the divine. I mean, and so, so all of that is still working itself out among us, modern people, and it's a work in progress. And this is one of the things, this was at the very core of why I started Esalen, where we could explore without being the prisoners of mainstream universities or churches, where we could go beyond and own what is our deepest birthright. And so forth. So
What's our deepest birthright?
Well, our birthright is to come in to this greater nature from which we came in the first place. See, this is what I believe, totally. From this Ananda, let's say in the Upanishads, Ananda, self-existent delight. From this Ananda, all these creatures were born. In this Ananda, all these creatures live and die. Into this Ananda, all these creatures will rise. And it's a view that Neoplatonism certainly reflects it. Plato, it's haunted the Western inquiry and imagination, but it's always been in tension with. This gets us very far afield. It gets us into our friend John Cleese of Monty Python fame. He's been a supporter of ours in the past and tremendous guy. And he, as he says, religion is basically 1% our quest for the divine and 99% crowd control. So our whole Judeo-Christian heritage is concerned with us being good citizens. And it's given us the great ethical gifts, and it's given us the Crusades, and it's given us degrees of bigotry, some of the cruelest acts in humankind. So it's our heritage, religious heritage, has given us wonders and given us cruelties. And modern people are trying to sort it out. And there's a whole spectrum of approaches. And it's a work in progress. And anyway, that's what Esalen's work.
Do you... Sorry, go on.
Well, maybe that's enough.
Oh, I see. Well, it's certainly not enough, but I could listen to you talk about this all day, of course. But I'm wondering, so do you have, it sounds like you have hope for humanity. Do you still have hope even with all the craziness and divisions we see in the world today? You've lived through a lot. Where do you see humans going right now?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Scott, that's there's no tougher question. It's
I know it's a neat question. Yeah.
Okay. All right. From where I sit, my life has taught me. Ethically, I'm an existentialist. In other words, it's up to us. I don't think it's all predetermined. This is the cosmos, the cosmic unfoldment. I have to turn to the Eastern idea of the Leela. It's a game, but it ain't tiddlywinks.
That's for sure.
Tough one. And then if we're going to have a talk like this, the problem of evil. Why?
Why does it exist? Why?
I end up where the Buddha did. Look, I couldn't give a lot of rational answers of why. But if I say simply that we're here to play this game, it's not fully satisfying. So what can we do? We can live into these domains where suddenly, wow, there's a way through. And then boil it down into our common life. There are countless ways to help one another. And I'm glad I was an acolyte, in the Episcopal Church. I appreciate that.
Hmm.
But when I look at the Crusades, you know, I look at the slaughter, the Christian slaughter of Jews,
Hmm.
even though Jesus was Jewish. The founder of Christianity happened to be Jewish. And so now we're slaughtering Christians or slaughtering Jews. I mean, the madness, human madness. And, you know, when it comes to the this now, what are our chances? Well, those of us,
hope?
you know, we're quite involved in this whole thing. Beg your pardon?
I just want to know if you have hope. I just want to know if you have hope.
Oh, no, Scott, you know, absolutely I have hope. I mean,
I know.
I'm putting my money on this. I mean, and absolutely. I mean, there's a ton of reason for hope.
Yeah.
But after you've been in debate, the many thousand debates that I have, I'm 90.
Yeah.
There are an awful lot of smart people who think it's 50-50. And there are a lot of smart people who are basically nihilistic. And they teach at places like Harvard and Stanford. It's not easily apparent to everybody that we have hope, but I definitely have hope. And but now let's say if I was making bets, we are all right. What about this climate situation?
Yeah.
We could still have a nuclear accident.
Yeah.
We're having, you know, we're quite involved. My wife, Dulcie, is the, you know, started this institute, Track to Diplomacy, and they're sponsoring a conference next month on the third bomb. You know, that you've heard this phrase, the third atomic bomb. You know, we've had two megaton bombs drop accidentally on the U.S. You know, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 13 kiloton. A megaton bomb would be like 500 or 600 or 1,000 Hiroshimas dropping, and two had fallen out on, you know, by accident, and fortunately didn't go off. But there's a lot of people think now that with the deterioration of Russian and American relations, here we came together with the end of the Cold War, and now we've gone apart. And we've always, you know, Russia and America, why can't we finally become true comrades and get on top of this situation? But there are a lot of things, and I blame both countries. I mean, they've and we have failed. And I tell you, if you had 2 or 3 of those 5 megaton bombs go off, wow. Yeah, I've spent so much time in this world, Scott. So I can't say la-di-da that just because we have this great vision of heaven and earth,
right,
and that we believe, as I totally believe, that this greater human nature is pressing to be born on us, that we'll make it on this planet. It might happen on another planet, but we have got to cross this line. Aurobindo, my teacher, said there's evolution in the ignorance and evolution in the knowledge. We haven't crossed the line into the evolution in the knowledge, and it's time for a big upgrade of Nietzsche. He has really been squashed in the modern academy. Jeff Kripal, who wrote the main biography of Esalen and was our chairman, and is really a tremendous visionary. And his new book on the superhumanities, it's a call for the humanities to embrace this higher life. Abe Maslow had been thrilled with what he's writing. And his book is going to be a bombshell when it comes out. It's how we fall into a sleep of prisoners, how we coast into a kind of gilded reductionism, and how we turn away from this big vision in 100 ways. It's amazing. It's so we've got a ways to go. I'm filled with hope, but when it comes to predictions, I finally have to say it's up to us. We just got to keep working and doing our best. I mean, that's where I end up. But to say that it's predetermined, I don't think so. It's a, I have to say, when we get into these conversations, Scott, did you ever read The Brothers Karamazov of Dostoevsky? Everybody should read it. But Ivan Karamazov, the brother of Alyosha, was the skeptic with his saintly brother. And he said, Alyosha, I will give you 10 cents for your God that can allow the death of an innocent child. And he tells this story of, this savage killing of this innocent child. And then he has a dream. And in the dream, Ivan Karamazov hears the voice of all voices telling him, you can understand, but to do that, you're going to have to climb up this hill for 1 billion years. And so he refuses, and he lays down, and he lays down for 1 billion years. And then he says, well, I've got to climb. And he starts climbing. And he gets to the top, and in 2 seconds, he understands. Now, what does that tell you? I mean, that is our situation. We have to work.
This is a really deeply personal question, and it's one in which I'm feeling very emotional asking you. I would like to know how I personally can carry on the human potential movement, because it's become a core mission of my own life. And to be able to ask you this question, one of the ones who's founded the whole human potential movement, it's such a poignant opportunity for me to ask you this question. So how can I personally devote the rest of my life to carrying on the human potential movement? And as well as others who are interested.
Well, Scott, I mean, I would say keep doing what you're doing. Keep pushing the envelope. Stick with it. And you will be rewarded in ways you don't even anticipate. I promise you that. Keep going. And you do attempt to nurture and cultivate both theory and practice, vision and practice,
and science.
It's a necessary marriage. I mean, we need both. And I too, and I do think you have high regard for what research. We think of ITP and Esalen having these. Sometimes I say, well, there are 4 pegs on the foundation. There are 4. Okay, theory, vision, and so forth. Practice, research, and then the cultivation of some sort of institutional support for it. How do you make it work down here on the earth plane? It's that's a tough one. But you certainly you are pushing ahead in your writing and in your support for a vision that's anchored in the best empirical disclosures we have. Best evidence. And to put that combination and practice, what can you do in practice? So I would say to you, just keep going. And to keep owning that combination of vision, practice, research that you represent, that you're embodying. Keep going, brother. Just keep
going. I'm gonna keep going towards my meta-normal experiences, as you put it, meta-normal. I love it. Extraordinary human potential that we're all capable of. Thank you for just inspiring so many people in your life and doing such amazing work, showing people greater possibilities for human nature.
Well, thanks, Scott. God bless.
You too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Psychology Podcast. Do you have a lot of ideas or questions after listening to this episode? We want to hear what you're thinking. Come join the Psychology Podcast After Party over on the Stereo app this Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, where best-selling author and life experimenter AJ Jacobs and I will be answering listener questions. In fact, AJ and I go live every Sunday, and we love having discussions with fellow psychology enthusiasts. You can join our show, ask questions about this episode, or anything else psychology-related, and share your experiences and opinions about the podcast overall. We truly want to hear everything within reason. We have been truly impressed with the listener questions so far. For example, here's a snippet of a listener question from last week that prompted a really enjoyable discussion about education.
So I did come prepared with questions and something that Scott really said, would mention on Twitter that really resonated with me was the human-centered education. And I was just wondering if you could, kind of share some of the successes that you've seen, how parents can promote that in public schools, and also what can we do at home to supplement, some of that like human-centered education. I mean, I think I try to, really promote, curiosity, exploration with my daughter, but I definitely would love to, hear some of your thoughts with, what you've seen.
Download the Stereo app now and follow me at stereo.com/psychpodcast and join AJ and I live this week. You can also get the link in the show notes. See you there, and stay tuned for more podcast episodes on the mind, brain, behavior, and creativity.